Today is June 6th, 2019, and it's the 75th anniversary of D-Day, Operation Overlord. And I'm here with Grant Carr, fellow military historian, and we are just going to shoot the breeze back and forth on D-Day and do a lot of speculation and just talk and
what ifs,
and let it roll, and we'll see what happens. This is intended to be our first try at a podcast, so we're just gonna
lots of experimentation in this one.
lots of experimentation, and so we thought that we would try and focus a little bit on some of the what if scenarios, which should be fun to talk about, and what might have happened if, or what might not have happened if certain things had been in the right sequence or in the right area. So forgive any of the traffic or any garbage trucks walking by, or children walking their dogs or anything like that. So we'll go ahead and start. Grant, what's one of the things that sticks out in your mind about a what if? What's one of the what ifs that kind of comes to mind first when you think about this?
What if, the Panzers were released on D-Day, or D+2 or 3, because we were really disheveled the first few days of Normandy, and trying to establish a good beachhead and figure out our supply situation. Because I don't think the Mulberry Harbor was even a thought early on during D-Day, I'm not sure when they came up with that, but
by not using, now there were better port facilities at Pas-de-Calais, which I'm pretty sure.
That probably plays in as to why they thought we were going to invade up there.
And of course it was the shortest route across. We're going to have to deal with some garbage trucks here. Obviously we timed this very well. One of the things about the tanks that you brought up is, obviously the command structure prohibited Rundstad or Rommel or any of those guys from having any control over what happened.
Thursday, June 6th.
Yeah, so Thursday, June 6th is garbage
day.
Guys doing their duty.
Knocking over our trash cans and...
We probably got one or two more stops before we can think about being heard.
Yeah.
So there's no operational control that any of the on-the-ground decision makers had. Rommel was on his way back to Birch's Garden anyways to try and get permissions to free up the tanks, right? The armored divisions.
Yeah, it was his wife's birthday on D-Day. He was back in, I can't remember the name of the town he was from, but he was celebrating his wife's birthday when he heard what was going on.
And
that garbage truck stinks, man.
It does stink. So is my commentary so far, but I'll get better. And one of the things also delaying the reaction or potential reaction of the Panzer divisions was the fact that Hitler wasn't even woken up. They let him sleep. And, so that plays into it as well.
I think they said somewhere he stayed up pretty late, didn't he? Like, he was not someone who ever went to bed. Like, he could stay up talking this guy's ears off till all hours of the night. And I think they said, I heard somewhere around like 2 or 3 in the morning, he took the pill to fall asleep, and that's, the paratroopers were being dropped in Normandy at that time, for sure, or they were already on the ground.
I read recently that there were somewhere like 1,400 or 1,500 armored vehicles, tanks, available in France. to potentially respond to the D-Day landings. And apparently, within the first few days, only 400 of them had been used within the first couple days, which I thought was interesting. Rommel's desire was to move them closer to the coast and repel the invasion on the beaches. And there's that famous quote that, you know, that's where the decisive moment will be, is if we can stop them right there on the beaches. I didn't even think Rommel said something to that effect. But speaking of the airborne forces, we were talking about this earlier, about how disheveled and disorganized and off point they ended up being. You know, disorganized, separated.
You know, and I actually read that when Colonel Vandervoort, who in The Longest Days played by John Wayne.
Okay. Oh, okay. Yep.
In the movie, they talk about, you know, remember that scene where he broke his leg and he's complaining about how far away from their drop zones they were? Mm-hmm. He was actually one of the few people who landed almost right where he was supposed to be.
Interesting.
Yeah, he landed pretty much on target. But it's also interesting reading about that night, what the Germans were doing when all this stuff was starting to happen, when the British gliders were coming in, and when they started getting reports about paratroopers landing. And I feel like their response was like, you know, it's probably nothing to it. They're probably just trying to mess around and divert us from something that could be happening farther up the coast.
For hours.
Yeah.
For hours they refuse to believe.
Yeah, and you hear about all these testimonials about these German officers getting woke up, tankers, and, you know, well, we'll go on red alert, see what happens, but we're not going to move anywhere. We're just going to stay here and wait for orders. And I think if the German army was like the American army in their theory of it's okay for a lieutenant to take control of the situation, to react, it's okay for him to take the initiative and figure things out, which is what happened on Omaha Beach. If it had been a reverse situation, if there were Americans defending those beaches and Germans attacking, think about how many American officers got wiped out, and how these young 20-year-old sergeants and first lieutenants had to take over whole companies and battalions. The German army was not trained to think the way the American army was.
And I think that's one of the things, getting back to the airborne for me, it's one of the things that allowed them to pick up the pieces of disaster and turn it into something, because of that lower ranking initiative that every soldier's taught, that when in charge, take charge, and if the person above you's taken out, you step right into that role.
Yeah, and that goes back into the situation with Rommel and Rochstedt wanting to release the Panzers. Was their chain of command was so step by step. This guy goes to this guy goes to this guy, and then eventually it's going to get back to Hitler. You know, nobody was phoning in Eisenhower the night of when the paratroopers was dropping in saying, "What do we do?" Nobody did that. They were there. They knew what was going on, and they figured it out.
Point.
Nobody called Eisenhower.
That's still a tradition that is there today.
Yeah.
It's from the highest ranking person all the way down to the lowest ranking person. I think it's across the military. When the person above you is removed, you step right into that role and fill his shoes in. I think that's really important when you're talking about an airborne operation that goes haywire.
Yeah.
I was thinking about the fact that the confusion of the airborne landings is, although it set us back in terms of timeline, it also was inadvertently something to confuse the Germans, because we did not make the drop zones effective.
Yeah.
They had a difficult time figuring out what we were doing, and they were confused as to what the objectives were because we hadn't landed on our objectives or met the objectives. So I got to thinking about that a little bit too.
But that all circles back around to the Panzer situation. If their ideology of the chain of command was like the Americans, those tanks would have been up and running and on the coast by the time our boys were on the beaches. And there's that story, I told you that story of that German tank officer, Hans von Luck. He was ready. He got his regiment up and running, and he was waiting to attack. It was when we were moving off of Utah Beach. And he could see us, he knew where we were, he knew what we were doing, and he knew how he was going to deal with us. And he had to wait for orders from Hitler.
Most of the Panzer divisions were over 100 miles away. If you think about that distance and how long it would have taken to move those Panzer divisions, as opposed to the what if, had they only been 10 miles away from Omaha, the difference that would have made. Because, and I think you brought this up to me one time, the armor situation for the Americans was non-existent.
Yeah.
But that also makes me think of what else was non-existent for the Germans, and that was essentially the Luftwaffe. And
Nothing in the air at all.
which is remarkable because you think about military strategy today, and one of the key components of American military strategy today is the goal of establishing air superiority, and even beyond air superiority to air supremacy, where you not only are you in control, but you are dictating how the air war is fought.
Yeah.
And Germans completely robbed of that.
If you, just like we was talking about, imagine if they could have brought Stuka dive bombers down on the beach, down on the boats, the transport boats.
What about strafing runs by
yeah.
109s or 110s into the Higgins boats?
I don't know. I don't know if the Germans ever had a plane that was. You know how we had planes that were designed to take out ships.
Oh, yeah.
They were meant to take out ships. Imagine if the Germans could have sunk a few ships.
They had developed air to surface missile capacity late in the war, as with most of their stuff. But
Yeah.
well, I don't know how late in the war, but they had the ability to control via TV connection, image, a missile in flight to a ship. It was the Hinkles something, and they actually had the ability to guide a munition into a hard target like a ship.
Wasn't that what they did with the V2s? Could they do that with the V2s?
V2s were more, I think, radar control, but were inertial guidance. But this actually gave the image, grainy as it must have been, back to whoever was in control of the missile to guide it to its target. If you think about a weapon like that, hooked up to being launched from an ME-262, that's a huge what if.
Yeah. I think you could take that step into the campaign. One of the best ways we figured out how to deal with their tanks was with rockets from Hawker Typhoons and P-47s. We decimated their tanks in Normandy with tank busters. You know,
and I think isn't that one of the reasons why they held them, because they were concerned about
it could have been
Allied air power taking out their tanks.
But when you look at, there's footage of a Typhoon coming down on a Panzer tank, and you see its rockets going off. And what if the Germans had something like that in Normandy? A Focke-Wulf. I think they rigged some of their Focke-Wulfs up with missile capabilities. But can you imagine if, because the Sherman tank stunk compared to the German tanks. It stunk. And if they had air power just in the concept of fighter bombers.
Lesson number 2 for podcasts. Maybe it's not good to do it when the lawn needs to be mowed.
I know.
Whatever.
We learned lessons.
Yep, whatever.
It's only the first one.
Yeah, I mean, you just think about what a difference it would have made, even if the Allies' total control of the air was diminished by 10, 20, 30%. What a difference that would have made for the beaches. And Omaha was a bloodbath as it was. I saw a picture of Pointe du Hoc from like maybe this year or last year. It was some video, and all of the craters from the bombing runs are still there. It's just completely pockmarked. That entire point right there.
Well, if you look at photos that were taken on D-Day after the bombing, it looks like the moon. It looks like they're flying over the moon.
Yeah.
They dropped so much ordnance, but it didn't do much though. They went too far inland.
Yeah, and that's the weather component again, which is something we haven't really talked about. The weather conditions, and what if the Allies had to have waited a month? Because I got to thinking, if the weather had prohibited June 6th, I think they would have had to wait about a month. But then there's a month for all that operational security to leak out. You know, the Allies had to be so careful. What was it Operation Fortitude or Operation Bridgehead? Something that was the program that was designed with deceiving the Germans from the beginning about where the landings would take place.
Is that when Patton had that fake army set up?
Yeah, and all of the intel, the deceptive intel and the deceptive radio transmissions and maps that they let float into their hands, all of that stuff was involved with that. If you think about that, delaying that a month would have run the risk of the Germans finding out somehow what was really going on.
And another month would have meant more time for Rommel to fortify the wall.
Yep, right, because he only been there since August.
Yeah.
August of...
He put so much fortification on the Atlantic.
Was it 43? 43 maybe something? Maybe it was October of 43, but he hadn't been there that long.
Yeah.
But he had already sunk hundreds of thousands of concrete into that.
Imagine if the Germans did get wind of our plans, those Panzer divisions would have been there on the first day. Probably.
Yeah. And if
been
I think it was Fortitude or Latitude, Operation Fortitude or Latitude, is the whole deceptive plan that they had of whether it was going to be Normandy Norway, all the way down to Spain and inside the Mediterranean. So there was all that deception taking place, and that month where that could have been exposed for what it was, if they knew that was going to be at Normandy, think about the difference that would have made. It's staggering.
We probably would have had to find another way in.
And there's another thing about the Luftwaffe. No aerial reconnaissance at all that was worth anything in terms of finding out what was really going on.
If they had seen... Are there reports of German pilots who went over and, like, you have no idea how many ships they're building up over there? Because remember, I don't know, I don't like relying on movies as source of information, but in The Longest Day, when they start bombing Plouskat, and he's on the phone with that guy, and he's saying, I'm looking at 5,000 ships right now, and the other dude doesn't believe him.
Right. Plouskat, he did make comments that were very close to that.
Yeah.
That's a pretty accurate scene where he's making that report, and they're just refusing to accept that.
Those 5,000 ships you say the Allies haven't got? Well, I'm looking right at them. That's literally what he says in the movie. You know, but what if they had known a little bit more than what they did?
Right. Any ability to put 2 or 3 pieces of information together credible. But it's almost as if they didn't believe, that, they wanted to believe Pas de Calais because it was the shortest route across, and they talked themselves into that and allowed us to deceive them further. So interesting. And that, the whole Luftwaffe thing goes back to the, I think of the Battle of Britain. What if the Battle of Britain had allowed the Germans to establish some level of air control over Britain?
Take it even farther. Imagine if Hitler conquered Britain. Because he wanted to. He was getting ready for it.
I think conquering Britain would have been... I think of having air control over Britain would have been essentially all he needed to do. There wouldn't have been the need for it, because if he controlled the air, then he would have had the ability to strangle them. I mean, if you think about the level of importance that maritime trade is to Britain,
Yeah.
and that was in 41.
The German U-boat, the U-boats just, that's a whole nother topic in and of itself, how much damage they inflicted. And it was only, it's hard to imagine how small their U-boat fleet was, and the fact that there were some U-boat skippers that sank over 40 ships by themselves. And then they had the wolf packs. They just inflicted so much damage on shipping and all that stuff.
And by not enabling Britain to be the forward operating base, the launching point,
the training area. That's where we
training
trained
area.
for Normandy.
all of those things.
Yeah.
By not having that, would D-Day have taken place at some point? Probably. But you think about all of the difficulties and how much more that would have lengthened the war. Because, and you think about this, you do that, and that makes the Pacific all the more dangerous, because the decision was clearly made by the Allies: we're going to win in Europe first, and then the Pacific. We'll focus on it.
Yeah.
Think about that. Think about the idea of more weapons development and technology for
The Germans.
the Germans. They're on the cusp of all
The
these
ME-262, if that was out during Normandy.
in larger numbers.
Because we look at the P-47 and the P-51 being one of the best planes of the war. But if the ME-262 was around on D-Day, they would have made mincemeat of us.
In better numbers. Yeah. Think about how the effect that would
Think
have.
about putting who was like guys like Gunther Rahl and Eric Hartmann in an ME-262. If they could have had that, if those fighter aces could have had those planes, they probably would have. I mean, Eric Hartmann shot down over 300 planes
That's amazing.
in
I did
his
not know that.
ME-109.
Wow.
Think about if he had a 262. He probably could have hit 1,000 because he was that good of a pilot. And the other thing is you have to take that into account. Like the Western Front, the Soviet pilots just were nothing to the Germans. So I feel like it was kind of, a lot of the times it was like rats in a barrel for the Germans. Because I think the highest scoring Soviet ace shot down like 62 planes or something like that. So,
The what if train never stops, and that's
Really
what I like about
doesn't.
it. It's pretty cool.
yeah.
And because when you mentioned the 262, made me think about other weapons, and there was actually a plan to have a submarine tow a submersible encapsulated V2 rocket across the Atlantic, ballast one end off the coast of the United States, and launch a V2
Under
as a sub-launched ballistic missile
into New York or something like
into,
that.
into the United States. If you think about, there's a book that came out a while ago. It was the Luftwaffe over America. Interesting what-if book, but it's talking about the fact that the propellant for the V2 was potato-based. and it made it unstable. You couldn't.
Speaking of planes.
Yeah, exactly. It was after several days it became unstable. That was really the only thing affecting that plan. And if you think about the fact that if they had a propellant in large enough quantities to make that plan capable, what that would have done to the war? Would the United States have sued for a separate peace, not being able to stop? Would they have responded? But all of these what ifs.
I would argue. I don't think there was any way that we would have made peace with him.
Or
That was just
neutral.
that was just
Maybe.
out of the question. Letting Hitler continue was out of the question to me.
Well,
You know,
think about it. You think about when we got into the war.
good old
We let him go. We let him
Yeah.
do his thing
good old FDR didn't want any of it.
from 38, 39, 40. It wasn't until the end of 41. That's a long time to let Europe fester,
And it took Pearl Harbor to happen.
and it took an event entirely across the separate part of the world for us to do it.
I don't know. I think if Hitler had the capability of attacking America like that, I wonder if this could be complete nonsense. I wonder if
That's
we
what we're
would've-
here about, Fred.
I wonder if we would have pulled the atomic bomb card a little sooner.
And used it against
Hitler.
Hitler. I read
Imagine
about,
if we obliterated Berlin.
I read about that. And obviously this is a progressive historian here who said this, but he said the United States would never have used our atomic weapon against white Europeans. It was a racial decision, and we only used it against the Japanese because they were non-white, non-European Asians. Yeah, I know, right? But so what did we do to? Well,
Hitler was developing atomic capabilities.
right. So you think about things like
Hello.
oh, historian number 3 comes on the scene.
Hey, Maisie.
This is Maisie. Crazy Maisie. So anyways, the phone's ringing. Do I answer it or not?
No.
I'm going to.
All right.
Be back. You ruminate.
Yeah, I'll ruminate. I'll keep talking into the camera.
Absolutely.
It's not ringing now.
Lesson number 3. Turn off the phones.
Turn off the phones and lock the door.
Well, I think it's like I said. You get on the what if train. You keep going forever. I think
This
it's
is a
awesome.
good start. We could have talked. I mean, we could talk just about Normandy for hours.
And I mentioned went to Hawk earlier, and what that looked like, and the Rangers going up, and when they got there, the guns weren't even there. And you think about if those guns had been in their mounts, firing on the ships that deposited the Rangers, or overlooking it was Omaha Beach, right? But they were
Yeah.
all right.
They
Down you
were
go.
like they were like to the left of Omaha, and it was like Pointawakke's here, and then Omaha's like right
they
around
were
here.
protecting the approaches
Yeah.
to Omaha. That's what I thought. If those guns had been in action, if the Germans had thrown enough potato mashers over the edge, only 225 Rangers. That's not
Yeah.
a lot if you think about it.
I often wonder, I'll point you up to Hawk, there's that terrain feature that juts out that looks down the beach. There's like that little seawall, I don't know what you call it. I don't know what the scientific name for it is, but imagine if they had an MG-42 nest right at the tip of that, shooting down
Enfilade.
enfilade.
Yep.
While they're climbing up, watching Rangers just dropping off the ropes and plummeting back to the beach. They just weren't prepared.
They weren't prepared.
They weren't prepared at all. But the thing is, I remember I watched this documentary. Stephen Ambrose was talking about the air bombardment, the naval bombardment. He said the air bombardment was too brief. No, the naval bombardment was too brief. The air bombardment went too far inland and didn't hit anything. The Germans weren't injured. They weren't suffering from concussion. They weren't shell-shocked. He said they literally got up, shook the dust and debris off, got to their guns. And he said they laid a wall of steel down onto the beaches.
So
They literally what we did was we gave them some ringing ears. And they got ready really quick, sorry.
no, if you think about
They
it,
got ready real
it's a
quick.
really important point because, and then you start taking together together with some of the other what ifs, the Luftwaffe, and weather conditions and all of waiting, and so many things went wrong, but it was so complex that so many things went right. And I want to get this quote in because I heard it today, and it was President Trump. And I mentioned it to you earlier. People knew they were going to die and went in it, hadn't completed their mission anyways. And that's stunning. And to know that that Higgins boat door is going to drop open.
And you're the first one who's going to get shot.
And you're the first one that's going to be shot. Yet you would stand there anyways. And the courage that took to do that.
It's the finest generation this country's ever produced, right
Hopefully
there.
there's a few more in the current generations that are coming up that will be that brave when they needed to be.
Yeah. I'm telling you, and I'm not trying to knock World War One, Vietnam, because I feel like in wars there's just different generations born and bred to do different things.
Mm-hmm.
But
Agreed.
the men that were there on D-Day, nobody else could have done that but them.
Right.
Nobody. The guys who served in Korea couldn't have done it. The guys who served in Vietnam couldn't have done it. The guys who served in Afghanistan now couldn't have done it. Those guys were the only ones that could have done it. Because we'll never see an event like that again. I don't think we will. We'll see a World War II where
Hopefully not.
hopefully not, but where a whole generation of 19, 20-year-old boys came together, banded together, and did everything they did to end that war. They knew what the stakes were. They knew what was at risk.
It's like that guy that I told you about, Lieutenant Joe Owen, died, chosen survivor, Marine lieutenant.
I'm so glad I got to meet him.
He said never underestimate the violence that a 19, 20-year-old American man can do when another person is forced to do it.
I remember something Tom said in at his Battle of the Bulge episode. He said when the stakes are down, there's nothing better than the American boy. Do you remember that?
I do remember that, and hopefully that's the case still.
Yeah.
Well,
This is a good start.
good start, good podcast, and
We'll work the kinks out.
Kinks will come out. Not for YouTube publication yet.
Happy D-Day.
Happy D-Day.